And I'd like to open with like inspiring or the quotes. This one is by the amazing Edward O. Wilson, of blessed memory. He was a famous scientist, famous particularly for ants. But he wrote a great deal. He was a good writer. One of his last books was on creativity. And he said, humanities will have to blend with the sciences because technology is going to demand the self-understanding of our species. And that is even more true than it was when he wrote this, because now with AI, we are really forced to figure out who humans are. If we've got this artificial intelligence, is there a real intelligence somewhere? So tonight we're going to discuss how scientific information is communicated to the general public, looking at academic writing and science in fiction, with a brief nod to nonfiction narrative. And Molly brought some visual aids too later of all these things. In a nutshell, scientists write what it is, nonfiction writers write what it means, and fiction writers write what it feels like. I'm going to talk about the science in fiction tonight, and Molly will be the voice of scientific writing. We don't have a nonfiction narrative writer tonight, mostly because they should have their own panel. There's so much there. So I just want to talk a little bit about that so you know what that is. And there's many wonderful writers of nonfiction who make science comprehensible to readers, like Elizabeth Colbert, who writes about climate change for the New Yorker and won the Pulitzer Prize for the sixth extinction. Ed Young translates complex animal studies into a readable form in an immense world. Great local writers include Deborah Kramer, who wrote The Red Knot, and Cy Montgomery of octopus and turtle fame, who just lives over in Ipswich. I highly recommend the New York Times Science Times section on Tuesdays and the annual anthology Best American Science and Nature Writing. Past masters of the form are Lauren Isley and Stephen Gould, who were keen observers of the natural world and beautiful writers. Many of these writers dig deep into scientific papers to get their facts, usually followed up by interviews with the researchers in order to make the data comprehensible to the lay public. I'm going to ask Molly to read a little bit from one of her papers so that we can hear what a scientific paper might sound like, and then we will talk about the science papers and the wide variety and their purpose. So, Dr. Lutcavage.
All right, Molly will do it. And I warned JoeAnn, because I've been writing a long time for science and I'm an editor for several journals and have had many grad students, that there's lots of kinds of science writing, and the goal is to have a good scientific paper that's comprehensible to everyone and not just fellow scientists. And that's hard to do, and it takes just like fiction writers. And so I told her, plus I don't want to bore everybody, because I sit here and read. My goal is tonight to bring a little bit of the personal as I read a scientific paper, that parts of it, I won't go on too long, that we published in 1999. And it ties to Gloucester because the title of it is, I'll put my glasses on, Results of Pop-Up Satellite Tagging of Spawning Size Class Fish in the Gulf of Maine to Atlantic Bluefin Tuna Spawn in the Mid-Atlantic.
And that's the title.
That's the title. And let me tell you, even selecting the title was controversial. And there are multiple authors. This was one that I led with many old colleagues, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 authors, co-authors, and it was published as a rapid communication, which means that's unusual because it means it's shorter than usual, and it means that it's something that you want to get out there quickly to alert the public because it's new, it's controversial, and you want to get it out there to influence what people think about that topic. So, should I read the first paragraph? Okay, so, and there'll be a coda to this because in 2025, I was on a long line trip in June that finally, after all these years, finally had the last piece of evidence needed to confirm what we hypothesized in the 90s. And so it's sort of, in addition to science writing, all the other stuff that goes in and that gets the imagination and is out there in the public and the media, New York Times writers that JoeAnn mentioned. So, all right, that's my preface. So, okay, this is the beginning of this rapid communication. And I'll skip over the Latin and I'll skip over citations.
Let me hear a little bit.
You want to do? Okay, all right.
I need to know how they're so full of citations.
Okay, all right. The North Atlantic bluefin tuna, Tunis tinus, is a highly migratory species present in large schooling assemblages in New England and Canadian waters from June through November. And we now know December, by the way. Bluefin tuna populations have been reduced back then by intense fishing pressures worldwide, and the US and Canadian fisheries are subject to strict quotas, still are. Since 1982, North Atlantic bluefin tuna have been managed under the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas, known as ICAT, as separate East and West Atlantic stocks with substantially different fishing controls. Mixing rates are estimated at 2 to 7% yearly, there's citations, Restrepo 66, but are ignored in stock assessments. However, the status and stock structure of the population remain controversial, and current models of long-term migrations include assumptions on transatlantic movements and spawning site fidelity that have not been extensively tested. Keep going?
No, I think we
Get the idea.
I think that's good. And that's the intro to the paper, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, and the intros are usually far more comprehensible, right? The précis usually condenses it, and then you read the rest of the paper is what it all backs up that.
That's how you present it to the public, or to your readers rather,
Right.
And it's to engage you on what is this paper going to be about.
Right. And that's usually as far as I get. Because then it just starts going, it dissolves into math sooner or later, and then charts and anyway. So what do you think about this form and how did this form evolve? Because it's like science hasn't even. I mean, the word scientist itself is fairly new, it used to be, they used to be all just called naturalists, and then we were scientists, and then somehow this form of communication with the world came into being, and what are your thoughts about how well it communicates?
Well, I think what ties most scientific publications together is that so-called scientists share what we consider a common ethos and training, that is what we call the scientific method. And that means you agree on a set of rules about how you're going to practice your investigation, how you're going to communicate it, can it be repeatable by others. It's basically a shared set of values for the most part, that is a common language for the most part, and that sets expectations that you can trust what you're reading to be true because of the supposed shared values in the scientific method and presentation.
Right. So when people talk about not trusting science, I think it's a lot of, we have so much science naivety to think that, they talk about good science and bad science, but yet that scientific method is the basis of all, the science. And that, but what do you have to say about when people say, well, a paper will come out, and then a month later, well, with red wine, the studies will come out and say, oh my gosh, it's so good for you, and then 3 months later, another study will come out and say, oh, it's so bad for you, and it goes back and forth, and that's the sort of thing that make people not trust science, not trust, and hear okay, so we might never know about red wine, but it's important that everybody agrees on climate change, that it's real. So what, would you like to address that, the back and forth
Yeah, that is the nature of science is continual change because you never have the total answer, as we all know. You know, everything is evolving around us, and we expect as scientists that what we found and what we published can be overturned. That's the way it goes. But what is changing now, JoeAnn, and why we're here, I think, I will say, at least in my lifetime, we are facing an unprecedented change and shift in what used to be what everybody understood as, well, scientists can be, at least many or most, because they're judged by others, are going to give you truthful information to the best of their knowledge. And what we used to believe were scientific outlets, now it's so much more blurriness in who calls themselves experts, what the understanding is of credentials. There is such a thing as credentials, and that all used to be given. And now we witness that this is sort of dissolving in front of us.
So with studies too, we're talking particularly academic, but like what gets in the paper a lot are studies that are funded by corporations, and that's presented as science, even though they're like totally biased, perhaps in the favor of red wine. You know?
No, or
as are many of us.
Or you could go back to tobacco. I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
That you know, there's always been a bias in almost everything. I have a bias, I'm sure, until I'm shown it's wrong. But there's the term for it's called the honest broker, and applied to scientists, it's, you know, you can't, at least in the old days, you had to call yourself either the scientist or the say conservationist and so it was really hard to be both at the same time, because if you were saying, oh, I think we should have closed areas on George's Bank at this month because, you know, it's going to harm, if we let fishermen go in there. If it's based on studies and you could say you can justify it, that's important. That means here's the data, here's what we need to know to make that decision for best safe practices. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if you don't have that information, you just think, oh, we should just close these areas because it's going to be good for the ocean. And if that's your view, that's fine. Have a conservation view or have some other view, but you have to then say, who am I representing, and am I representing myself as a scientific expert in that field, where my credentials are there and I should be trusted or believed, or am I trying to be both at the same time? And that's easy to do, and it's very hard to stay in your lane. And sometimes you can be both, as long as you identify yourself as, this is my opinion, I really want to save the Gulf of Maine from X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to tell you that I'm telling you that's my bias.
Okay. So are you hoping, I mean, all these papers, is it like science for science sake, or are they like hoping like policymakers are going to see this, or just the media, or just tenure? I mean, what are all these papers being written towards?
I mean, there's so many reasons why people do what they do in science, but I think most of us, I'll just say most of us, as students, we want to make something better through knowledge and understanding, and there's passion behind your choice of your career, your art, and I think people have to make a living, so they may pick certain things to remain a scientist and do things, but I think the goal is to be productive and put something on the table that helps, particularly in ocean science, conservation, whatever. We want to leave things better, and so, but it's, I think very few people are out there toiling away in the lab just to take up their time. And I think of, what's her name, she was at UPenn when they didn't give her lab space, and she basically found the RNA, she's, she was someone that toiled against all odds and was horribly treated as a scientist. She went through so many trials, And her goal was, she believed that RNA was so important that it could save lives and vaccines, and yet she was treated so horribly and still prevailed, even working in the halls of my alma mater, because they wouldn't give her lab space. And so she's an example of someone that was selflessly working to basically better human health.
Yeah, I got my COVID shot yesterday. My mRNA shot. So, yep, saved lives. So before I go closer to reading a little bit from Float and talking about science and fiction, could you just speak just a little bit about how this gets interpreted, how in the media? I mean, we're talking about the interface between the data and the public, and in between that is often the media.
That's right, and I even think of you as the fiction writers, because when the fiction writers finally get to want to use the science, I would presume that some of it, their knowledge is not coming from reading initially the scientific papers, but the media is, I speak from having family members that are reporters and writers. So unfortunately I'm biased by what I know about what has happened to the numbers of science writers and editors has been vastly downsized, even in the New York Times and the AP. Scientists are challenged to speak easily and well to reporters and to the media. We suck at it most of the time. We use too many long sentences. We can't tell a simple story and break it down for a couple sentences. And so scientists are very frustrated with when we're interviewed and then the story comes out in the New York Times or the Guardian or something, and you think, it's not even right. So it's really hard to get, that's why really good science reporters and writers in the media are extremely important and very rare, and they're harder and harder to keep their jobs because of downsizing. And so I've struggled in the past when I've seen coverage of our work, and then they miss some really important things, and you think, and then I blame myself because I'm not so good as I'd like to be at communicating. But science writers, journalists, and media are so important. Yeah. And it's hard for them because they also need the training like scientists, and they're doing their best.
Yes, and actually many science reporters and nonfiction narrative writers, a lot of them, like, they go into it just being complete idiots, like as if they know absolutely nothing about science, because that's, they're writing for somebody, for a readership that might know nothing. So they sort of go into it and just keep asking the questions from the researchers, and to keep going, well, what do you mean? Well, even though they might know what it means, but they are often like, well, I don't get it, and sort of force researchers and scientists to just keep rephrasing and rephrasing until they're like, okay, now anybody's going to understand that, and that's what goes into the work. So it's work being a science writer.
It is, and I will say that sometimes their argument, or not argument, is response when you say, wait a minute, or what do you think? They said, well, I only had 20 minutes. Right. Or my editor took over and screwed it up. So they're up against it too, and they're underpaid. Yes,
all underpaid. Before we go, do you want to show? I'd like people to see some of the visual aids before we.
Yeah, I told JoeAnn it would be too boring if I read too much of any scientific paper, but I wanted to show, particularly getting to her work. I'll pull up my
different types, variations.
Different types. So talk about how science inspires writers. I'll go back quickly. Here's an example of a very good book by an amazing writer, Doug Wynot, who some of you may know. He wrote Giant Bluefin. He wrote Joel White's, E.B. White's Last Boat, Following the Swarm. Anyway, I met him when he was writing about bluefin tuna, and he did one of the best jobs of getting it right, interviewing fishermen, everybody, and so that's nonfiction. And it was very, very good nonfiction. He did his job. And then we have an example of one of my, Bart DeFiore, some of you may know him. Bart's now he's a PhD ecologist, but Bart wanted to be a writer, did go to Bowdoin, and he submitted a bluefin nonfiction story about his experience in Gloucester as a fisherman, and it did a beautiful story for the Virginia Quarterly because he actually thought he was going to be a writer, but he ended up as a PhD scientist. So anyway, Bart won an award, and he's in that. And then this was an interesting, when I was contacted by an architecture student years ago who had read something about our aerial survey stuff. This is 4 days in the North Atlantic bluefin, and this architectural student in Boston basically followed the track of a bluefin tuna from the fisherman's boat across the dealers all the way to the airport to Logan, being shipped to Japan to Tsukiji Market. So it's a timeline with pictures that is a very cool approach to bluefin tuna and sushi.
Right.
And
What pictures help.
And then here's one of my last ones. So going back to how scientists inspire writers, Wild Science, this is a woman that I worked on sea turtles for many years, and she featured some of our work on, this is for kids, when we were doing leatherback tracking in the Costa Rica.
And there she is.
So she did a chapter on that for kids to inspire, particularly kids to be scientists. And then the last bit comes back to JoeAnn and fiction. So this is called Bluefin Blues, an Aristotle Sacchardes mystery by Paul Komprekos, Cape Cod mystery writer back in the 90s, and he had come to one of our talks at Mass Audubon on the Cape and talking about aerial survey, and he put a protagonist in it. One of them was Sally, the marine biologist that used to be a mammal trainer that then at the aquarium decided to get into tuna and ran an aerial survey and flew in spotter planes. And Sally was almost murdered because of anyway, so we find ourselves in fiction and mystery novels sometimes too.
And a bluefin body washed up on the beach.
That's right. So there you go.
Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit from Float. So most of my fiction, and I actually bought a few books at the end. If anybody is interested, Gordon will help you purchase a copy and I'll sign it. But this is Float, which is old now, but it was like important in my writing, I think like the year 2012 or something. And that it really, like, I just had this idea and of the book just being sort of based in a place like Gloucester. I actually put it in Maine, but it's Gloucester, and it's really Neptune's harvest, and about a gurry plant, a dehyde. And so I just sort of started out with also conceptual art, because I just love conceptual art. I mean, it's like all these things that I really love and was tying together. And then like from page 1 though, it like totally turned on me, where I've got the owner of the plant on the beach looking at some writing in the sand, and I'm just writing, it's right, la 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 la, and I'm like, well, what's on the beach? And I start thinking about what the sand and stuff, and then I was like, and the plastic, and then I just start remembering all the plastic I've ever found on the beach, and it went on and on and on, and it became a dark comedy about plastics in the ocean. Because of that, and then it also started because writing's like hard, and you want to stop writing and do something else. So research. So I just love I'm writing even though I'm like reading this book, and so I just I needed an enormous amount of education to write this book. I mean, about the ocean warming and ocean acidification and the fisheries and the plastics in the ocean, which was huge. And then I had to find everything out about plastics in the ocean because writing's hard. You really don't want to be sitting there. So I just found everything out about plastic. I swear, when I started this book, I'm not sure I knew that plastics were an oil product. Or a petroleum oil product. I think I didn't. That probably was taught in school when they used to teach us all the wonderful products from oil, and I just forgotten. But it's a byproduct of natural gas, and they're upping it because they once thought that they were that the renewables were going to take the place of oil, so they were looking for other ways to use their products, and they have then upped their plastic output, and plastics are just horrifying. I mean, the more you know about it, it becomes its own like crime fiction. I mean, it is horrific, and what it does to the fish. They all become hermaphrodites, and they carry and the fish eat them because they break down into single cell molecules like plankton, and the fish are just full of. It's a hard. So anyway, that's how this is how this sort of began, and so I'm just good. And then I found out it was like really hard to find a passage that that reflected any of the research because because when it's done well, you don't know that you're relying. So the reader doesn't realize all the work that's gone in on the research. You don't, and you can't sound pedantic. I mean, you can't, or that you're lecturing or anything like that. It's like I think I wrote Barbara Kingsolver. She's a good science writer. Actually, I love her essays, but her fiction, she fits a lot of it in. Oh, here it is. Yes. But novelist Barbara Kingsolver said, "The artist's maverick responsibility is sometimes to sugarcoat the bitter pill and sleep it down our gullet, telling us what we didn't want to know." Having said that, I find that sometimes it's too obvious in her work. If you want to know, she's not here. I can say that, and I just love her essays. But sometimes the fiction is a little heavy-handed, of like the message that she's trying to get through. So anyway, so I found it a little hard to just pull something out. But so I thought I'd read a little bit about jellyfish, because jellyfish turns out to be this. All my research turned out to be this enormous problem in the oceans, because basically everything is going to die out except for jellyfish. I mean, it's going to be an ocean of jellyfish. I mean, they were here first, they're going to be here after. They're highly adaptable, but the oceans are just full of them, more and more of them. They clog up like water filtration, cities' water filtrations. There's a problem with too many jellyfish, and simply because they just fill in the places where other fisheries are dying out. Nature hates to avoid, and therein go the jellyfish. So part of the when you said that you read from your paper that now it's all been vindicated about, even more so. So when I developed one of the subplots with jellyfish is that jellyfish could be made into plastics. Because basically you can take almost, you work hard enough, you can make almost anything into a polymer. And so I was sort of working on that, and there was a lot of hypothetical stuff out there that, yes, this could be true, this could happen. And so I sort of was working on that somebody, a deranged chef, develops a jellyfish plastic by making soup that just solidifies. And but then, I was like 2 years after the book came out, a company started that's doing jellyfish plastics. Mm-hmm. And so, it's out there. It's probably too expensive, not commercially viable yet, but eventually I think that we'll all be using jellyfish plastics. Let me see. So this is Duncan is the owner of what we'll call Neptune's Harvest. Duncan bounced up the stairs to Slocum's apartment to share some good news from the lab. Trevor had wrangled money from the university for further study of the soup. The jellyfish concoction, which had nearly killed Osbert, was continuing to show promise as plastic. Boiling water, brine, acid rain, and dozens of other likely elements had failed to change its shape, making it commercially viable, and yet, because it was made of jellyfish, environmentally sound. Most so-called biodegradable plastic was still made from petroleum that lurked in the environment forever, making it questionable at best, and true biodegradables made from corn were fertilized with petroleum products and used up valuable farming land. Jellyfish, however, were the cockroaches of the sea, plentiful and free for the taking. I knew it, said Slocum, slapping his hands together, his body still wrapped in a white linen apron from work. My jellyfish might have failed at soup, but they'll rule the world as bags. The kitchen walls, the color of lard, were tinted orange by the oblique light of the setting sun, coming in through the window and cast Slocum in a Renaissance glow. Ancient utensils hung from the rafters, along with bundles of herbs, various scales, and a smoked ham. For someone who espoused a modern molecular approach to cooking, Slocum's kitchen was practically medieval. You can't patent a jellyfish, said Duncan as he took his windbreaker off, but you can patent the process. And if it turns out you're the one responsible for creating the plastic and not nature, you'll be a wealthy man. Now we wait and see what it does in time-simulated experiments. A lot depends how and when it finally breaks down into its molecules. Slocum leaned against the kitchen sink to take this news in, and a faraway look crossed his face. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, molecule to molecule, he mused. We're all from the same basic material, aren't we? Speak for yourself, said Duncan, grabbing a beer from the refrigerator. I'd like to think I'm different from a jellyfish. That's where you're wrong, said Slocum, giving his mustache a little twist. All living things, us, the eel, the bird on the wing, we live and die at the cellular level. Well, your soup had better not break up into its cells too soon, or else we won't have a product. Besides, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Most research ends at a dead end. The Stone Age didn't end because they ran out of stones, my friend. It ended because something better came along. And I'm going to stop there. And we're going to talk a little bit about how science works in fiction. You know, as when I said earlier that, fiction lets us feel it. This is also like really good narrative nonfiction science is that they'll sometimes like follow people. I mean, you've got to have like people, and you've got to have characters, and you have to become attached to them and care what happens to these characters. The jellyfish plastic has great meaning for a lot of people. The whole company is riding on this at this point. The company is sinking, is going under, the marriage is going under, everything for Duncan depends upon this plastic working, or at least some hope of it. So let me see. So we have to care about the characters. And like for my most recent book, The Royal Circle, I had to do a set in the West, which starts with wildfires and ends in floods, and I had to do an enormous amount of research on wildfires, book after book after book after book after book on wildfires. This how they start, how fire works. Is it going to be uphill, downhill, everything about fires, and a lot of those books were narrative nonfiction, but they were pretty dry. They were, even when they were following people who were evacuating, it was just like the facts. It was like, first Mr. Smith got in the car, he gathered the dog, the wife came back out with the kids, they went down this road, and then they had to turn around and go back down another road, and the other road, they were blocked, and the family all died. And so, but it's like this so presented like we didn't know the Smiths, and all of a sudden they're dead. And so you sort of all these books, I felt, oh God, I wish they'd, I wish I had cared about them. I wish I'd known about them. So really good narrative nonfiction will actually stay with people, with characters for a long time and follow them until the reader cares. So with fiction, That's what you do. You're putting your characters through the paces of whatever horror that you're throwing at them, whether it's wildfires or floods, and they have to react. They in the kitchen you make jellyfish soup and it burns everybody's stomachs. You just walk. You just are with it, and so that's what fiction. That's science and fiction. It's why I like climate fiction, because like science is difficult for people to understand, and they're getting conflicting information all over the place, and and to the point that nobody believes anything. And so, but if you get them sort of involved in a story where the characters are just, struggling, and that they are, hopefully are attached to these characters. And, hopefully then by the end, that some empathy has developed, and you think, oh gosh, that could have been me, or that could have been like a family member, and like what can I do? Because you sort of want to get to action, but you want people to change their behavior, even if it's just like changing their vote, just not using so many plastic bags and looking into alternatives. So, and I also like to say that everything, I forgot to mention, every single children's book that's in the bookstore downstairs, every single one is a science book. And so that's also like the best way to communicate things. Like writing is actually, it's hard, just a bunch of scribbles on paper, like they're just symbols and you're trying to create images. But real images, like, the drawings, the art, that goes straight into the limbic system, and then you feel it, and you can get kids all riled up. It's like a great way to instill science literacy is just as early as possible with picture books. The bluefin book with the thing. I mean, images help a whole lot, because I think just in terms of like thinking and like let's just say revolutions. Like revolutions sort of start like deep in the brain with music. That bypasses everything and goes like way back there. And so it's usually a change happens first through music and then through the visual arts. And then once again, sort of bypassing. And then comes things like fiction, which is creating images with words. But it's a long haul still to get from words on the page to images in the brain, to touching the parts of the brain that might say, well, I should change. I should change my life, So I have more questions from Molly, but perhaps there's questions from the audience.
I just have to remark on what I think is the courage of the fiction writer like you that is willing to do all of that work. And I loved hearing what you said about some of your goals as far as to change the readers, their experience of how they could be emotionally and what they might do in the future with their world. I mean, but to do all that work, it's a lot, and that's a lot. I think that's incredible. And that, I just have to say the word is courage that I would use to take that all on, because that's a lot. So good job.
It's still, all that research is still easier than the writing.
I believe it. And I just have to say one other thing. I can't imagine in Float, I reread it, and so it was fresh. And that the whole concept of the jellyfish soup, I mean, that just disgusted me to like visceral disgust, because jellyfish are beautiful, many of them, but if you ever, leatherback turtles, their entire diet is exclusive to jellyfish and jelly-like creatures. And if we had a lot more leatherbacks, JoeAnn, in the oceans and their cousins, perhaps there would be fewer jellyfish, because they have to eat their body mass per day in jellyfish and I would know that because I had to raise jellyfish to raise little leatherbacks. And so my perspective on jellyfish is personal and also from how amazing, but I cannot imagine. I know they can be in salad and I know that other thing, but in soup, really?
Yeah, there's a Chinese, Chinese.
I knew that.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure it's like poisonous as well. But, yeah.
I had a question
Yeah.
for Molly. Molly, how would the layperson, when they hear a bit of news or they read something that's scientific based, when you're a scientist, you develop that sense of ethos and you have sort of an outline that helps you take apart the subject and then pull it back together. How would the layperson, look at something and say, that is good science, those numbers make sense, or boy, they're comparing that to that, which is not even relevant, and then it gets skewed and agendas move it off in another way. How do you separate good science and agenda-driven science?
I don't know if I can answer that. That's such a tough thing. I mean, I think it's all based on experience of the individual and what they know about their world and where they get their information from. And we could all look around at fisheries. And I can tell you that having lived in the fishery world with fishermen on their boats for 30 years or more, I've witnessed what their perceptions are. They are experts when they're out in the water. They have more experience than many, many fishery scientists, but they may interpret what they see differently. And they're experts of a kind, but their view is usually their view of what they know about their world or the part of the ocean they're fishing and what their buddies say, and as opposed to maybe what's going on in some other part of the ocean, and how broad is their perspective. So I honestly don't know how people they use their own thoughts, right, and their own opinions and their family and their friends and what they read and where they read it. But I don't think I couldn't even answer that question because it's so challenging, particularly now, even in the last couple of years, as we look around and coming back to the theme of science and art and what's going on now. We're under assault on every front, and I'll just say personally, it's been hard for me to work now on the waterfront with people that now have very different views of what should happen next as far as our fisheries and how they're managed and who's in charge of it. And now for the first time in my career, I'm at a real challenging position of, if we don't share the same values and the same agree that facts are this, but it's really hard. And that's just what I do in fisheries and ocean science, particularly with people that I've worked with side by side for a long time. And so, yeah, it's hard.
Were you there? Did you see Kenny Rioff's reading of the play the other night?
We had another event,
I think another part of the arts and stand-up for arts and science at Rocky Neck this week, and it was having an AI presence on the boat, on the vessel, instead of a human.
An observer.
An observer. It was an AI observer, and it was really fascinating because you really got to see what everybody felt about about AI, but also just like being so monitored. It was a great reading. It's going to be a great play.
I heard he'll do it again, so we'll see.
Yes, and we'll see. Yes, we'll see it then. So, yep, go ahead.
So I have a question on how you're handling one of the latest assaults, which is the erasure of data from some of our websites, like for NOAA or other institutions that we've relied on. And then a possible solution is for some of the academic journals to open up their journals for readers from the public like me.
Yes.
I'm constantly stymied by the paywall.
Yeah.
And I understand that they need money to keep going, but perhaps just embargo their stuff for their own members for a year and then let the rest of us go in and check the academic journals, and we may not understand it all, but at least we'll get something more than an abstract. And I was faced with this particularly, well, in two different instances, but one with trying to research a rare cancer mutation and to come up with appropriate trial drugs. Because our own doctors are overwhelmed and can't keep up. So it's up to individuals to try and do the matching. But when there's a shutdown, you can't, there's a paywall. It's really hard.
Right, so you're talking
So
about, the
two
question is like, but
questions.
basically the same of the access. You
Access.
know, right now,
That's a great
all the information that we have paid for with our tax dollars,
Right.
you know, the NOAA, all those sites, and I don't
Or
know.
NIH, you know,
NIH.
in the medical field, yeah.
Yeah,
We could have a whole, you're so right, I mean, there's so much to talk. I said, JoeAnn, how are we ever gonna do this? There's so much, because there's so much, but you're so right. And there are steps to change. There are open access journals now, and a lot of us would love to only publish. It should be just what you said, JoeAnn. We pay for it, you pay for it. Publishers many of them are Springer, they're hugely wealthy. And we editors work for free, and you review and you write. So it's really messed up. And many of us talk about there needs to be a revolution in that access and how it's all done. But you're so right, because now we're all horrified and disgusted and sick, and what do we do? What we're doing tonight. But what you said is so important, biomedical, and what you said about consuming your own information as best you can, best sources for health and biomedical and all that stuff. But how do we get there? How do we do that?
I'm also faced with this in history. So the same issues that are facing scientists right now are facing historians and independent scholars as well, with the erasure of information and access issues also for independent scholars. Just the same. Thank you.
go ahead.
Well, thank you both very much, and compliments to, well, I have a question or three. The newer generation of scientists, do you think that they put as much importance on being the honest brokers that you talked about? And is that something that they're learning in terms of, like, doctors learn bedside manner? Do these scientists learn how important it is to be an honest broker? Separate question. The liaison that your scientific writers, they serve as a liaison between scientists and somebody that you referred to, JoeAnn, as readership. Mm-hmm. I am a classic example. The fact that I could follow your talk is almost a miracle, but I did. and so how do we then think about when AI does come in? How are we gonna, again, where is the importance? Because so many, including JoeAnn, from what you said, people, when they read that introduction, I was not lost, but that's it. It goes as far as that, and the rest of it, I just zone out. And so I do depend on those, writers and editors to kind of translate for the layperson. Yeah, those are a few questions. Anything you have to.
What was the first
The
part?
first one was, do you think that the newer generation of scientists realize how valuable being an honest broker is, and is that taught to them in academics when they're actually studying? Because it's hugely important how much trust we readers put on what they're saying.
I can just say what I know. I still think that there's a lot of shared values, and that at least hopefully, I'm just speaking to, like, for example, when students and postdocs have turned in like high mucky muck academicians that had been, as you probably heard, basically misrepresenting their data and their publications, and some very high-powered top scientists have been turned in for doing fraudulent things. And I think that's a good sign, you know. One
That's right, and it goes back to the scientific method that they do all, and they're in school. I mean, everybody learns the scientific method in elementary school, and then it becomes basic, or used to, and then it becomes basic practice. I mean, you know, these studies are you know, have to follow the scientific method. They have to be replicable. You know, it's like that other scientists have to be able to follow that recipe and see if they get the same results. So, and if they don't, well, what does that mean? You know, it doesn't mean that the first one was wrong, but it means that there are variables in there. So, yeah.
And the second question was about how AI will change the process of translating what the scientists are saying and the research is saying to how we're understanding it, we, the quote-unquote public.
Yes, we just talked about that
We do.
before.
It's a profound problem, and it's at every level of, in the last 10 years, and now accelerating as far as how information is getting out, and even in our own scientific world and scientific publications. AI, I'm of the generation that didn't have to deal with this as much, but now if you still work in science in our field, you don't have a choice, and we faced it at every place. And I haven't taught or had grad students for now about 6 years, and so in those 6 years, things have changed on campuses, and I know that. And as the faculty are downsized, and as everything that's going on right now is basically sets the stage for AI having a larger role in everywhere. And I don't like to use the word fear, because that means we're under that, and I won't use the word fear. But people have to, your questions are really, that's a profound question, and it's happening, and people are trying to figure it out, but it's, young people, I just don't know. I'm not teaching undergrads right now, but I would love to know what undergrads are being taught now at UMass or anywhere else, Harvard, whatever.
Right. And of course, AI is, you know, for any writing. I mean, there's now 1 million AI-generated novels available on Amazon, because you just, you know, you ask the right questions and you give the chat box and give it the, you know, a basic plot and some characters, and say what you'd like the outcome is, and that you'd like it in the style of Michael Crichton or something, and it spits it out. And there it is for sale on Amazon, and that they have a following, and a lot of people know their AI, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So humanity and the humanities is, you know, what we are trying to like integrate science and the humanities now more than ever, because, you know, as I said at the beginning, AI is really forcing us quite rapidly to figure out what is human, you know, who are we? And that's what the humanities do. And so, those are, you know, we could, next year's festival, we'll maybe focus on AI and where are we, if we're left, if we've been allowed to like survive. And having said that, though, I've been working with my new work, which is connected short stories, some of which have been published, like in Slate.com. The very first one is set in the future, and it's run by, and the world is run by AI. And but it's like I'm trying to do this like friendly spin on AI, because like it doesn't have to be the overlord. You know, it can be a tool. It can be a human tool. And so and it's all about, you know, being DNA, genetically, everything is genetically modified, including humans. And because the world is so very different from the one in which we've evolved. And so, you know, we better do something, and we better do something fast, or, you know, or it will be just the cockroaches and the jellyfish surviving.
So do we have some happy things to kind of? Question.
A happy question.
This is steering in a little bit different direction, but is there any room in either of your worlds for conversations that include indigenous cultures and their beliefs, and teachings, and knowledge in your work?
Oh,
Well, yeah, so in your world, there's definitely a lot of studies, medicinal studies.
yeah, and I mean, even in ocean, as you probably know, I mean, I work in Hawaii, and it's been a real eye-opener to learn, I mean, to be there where you're the outsider, you know, the indigenous knowledge, you learn it, but we were just talking about it, the Hawaiians manage their fisheries and their natural resources so beautifully until, you know, the New Englanders came and, you know, the whalers and so, but just the knowledge out there, where you see it in action, which you can in some areas in the Hawaiian Islands, not to mention Native American, which I mean, even what's gone on, for example, in Chesapeake Bay, the illustrations of what was in the bay at the time from depictions of Native Americans fishing and using pound nets things with sturgeon and sea turtles and everything else, and the abundance, and it was just, the knowledge is all there, and so, you know, it's really, it pisses you off to see what we've done to this all over, and particularly in places like, you know, Polynesia and Hawaii, that where it's really screwed up because of us, and so, I don't know if that answers you, but there's so much to learn there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fiction out there, including some of my newer work that totally is like, you know, because what will be left, you know, at a certain point, it'll be like just person-to-person knowledge and, you know, pass down information in all cultures. And, you know, and it won't be, you know, I don't think that humans will disappear from Earth, but I do think that cultures will. Cultures rise and fall, they disappear, and, you know, and every time there's that happens, it's like always a little scrambling back for more, you know, before everything went bad, you know, looking for the indigenous type information. And in my other world too, my gardening world, there's a huge amount of information and writing about indigenous plants, and Fedco now gives, you know, for certain seeds in their catalog, they give 10% back to the tribes who have kept these seeds alive. So, yeah.
Is that an area of your knowledge?
It's an area of study for me, yes. Limited knowledge, but study. But I think it's also can be a slippery slope for scientists, because you include too much of that into a scientific paper. Some people will dismiss the paper based on too much of that. And in fiction, you can run into problems with cultural appropriation and other issues like that. So I try to include it in my writing, but I'm very careful about it. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Go ahead.
Molly, when you read to us from your paper from 1999, you alluded to an hypothesis about studying in the pop-ups on the fish, and then you said you were vindicated in your trip this past June. Did you find some of the pop-ups that were...
No, but I guess I wouldn't use the word vindicated. Bill knows he's
That
heard
was actually my word.
He knows I've complained to him about bluefin probably over the decades, but I used it as an illustration of science working and not working, because in fact that knowledge was there before, say, let's like 70s, 80s, 90s bluefin fisheries management. And the old biologists, naturalists had it right. They didn't have this explicit knowledge that we have with electronic tags and data records following fish for the last 27 years. And in fact, there was actually push against it. Even though it was all there, we laid it out, we predicted, but we weren't out in the high seas, so we couldn't find the larvae that we predicted had to be there. But when we finally had the whole migration routes of these bluefin over the last 20 years, we even put that on the table and said they don't go to the Gulf of Mexico and blah, blah, blah. But there was still not non-acceptance of it. And so after 27 years, I said, we just did this cruise, and we finally were out there. We finally got the money to go on a longliner and actually, with the fishermen, get the fish that we predicted had to be in spawning condition, that we could never get to before because we were never funded to go out there, because nobody wanted to find out that that's really what's going on. So that's what happened after. Basically, my lab spent 27 years putting all the pieces of the story together and all the evidence. And I go back to 1999 and 2007. We laid it all out. We had all the other pieces except for the smoking gun, the larvae. And for the first time now, the director cruise, my colleague at NOAA, Dave Richardson, found in 2013 actually. But they said, oh, it's a fluke. Oh, it's just you just got lucky, or it's oceans were warm, and it's just some fish coming out of the med. And even some famous nonfiction writers, environmental, said that we're in the pockets of commercial fish and we were wrong. It's been a battle for me personally. And so to get out after 27 years and show that we were right all along, in fact, the old guys were right, that's how long it took us to do something as simple as show that bluefin spawn off our shores in the Slope Sea and all along the margin of the continental shelf. And it's probably been like that for a long time, for a very, very long time, which accounts for why there's so many bluefin everywhere. And so, but why would you resist it? But that's because it wasn't a convenient knowledge, and it was something that happened with the science. And then all these people that write about bluefin too, I mean, it's an exciting, people love oceans and knowledge, and that's why you read books and nonfiction books. So, but the scientist also has to be driven by nature and beauty, and for me it was getting to the truth of what bluefin do, truth as biologists and as ecologists, and there are rules. And E.O. Wilson, E.O. Wilson would have believed us once we but he didn't pay attention to Tuniua's ants and other things. But anyway, that's what, thank you, Bill. But it's just like, it shouldn't have been that way, and but science is hard, and sometimes science, people aren't ready for it, for whatever reason.
Right. And you really still, as through thousands of years, the intersection of humans and science is simply really close observation. Just really staying with it and just observing, and really if you write, then writing down what you've seen, otherwise you're passing it down to other generations orally. It's like, everybody just closely observing the natural world.
And
that's science.
I will say too, though, that even like AI, JoeAnn, I'd say everything's shifted to, again, because genomics is it. And I think the idea of observing and going out, that's, our students may not get there because genomics now dominates so much. And I worry that the natural world will be interpreted through genomics, but it won't be observed. And that's why I hope that the informal scientists, the everybody that's out there, we can't lose observation. We can't just go to genomics. It's another analysis of data, but it's not observing the natural world.
No.
And so you need it all. And so genomics will inform us of what we should be paying attention to, but you can't just do that. And so that's my big fear too, is that observation, as it's been practiced for centuries, may be harder to get funded. And so it's up to citizen scientists to be out there.
Because anybody can just observe. Everybody who's bird watchers, and paying attention to the birds. That's science. So.